For the longest time, it was one of India's most remote corners, a land of just incredible beauty, yet kind of off the map for most travelers. But in the last 10 years or so, something has dramatically changed. Today, we're going to dig into the amazing transformation of Northeast India, from what was a forgotten frontier to one of the world's most talked about tourism hotspots.
I mean, just look at that. The clarity of the water, this absolutely pristine landscape. This is the image of Northeast India that has always been there. But for so long, it really was a paradise unexplored. This is the kind of immense potential we're talking about, right? A natural treasure just waiting. But its beauty, well, it hit a much more complicated story.
Because for decades, the story most people heard was completely different. A study back in 2012 found that over half the people they asked saw the region as riddled with insurgency, and they immediately thought of danger and instability. So you have this huge contrast between breathtaking beauty and a reputation for conflict, and that's really the heart of our story today.
So that brings us to the big question. How did a region that was locked away by conflict, by terrible connectivity, and just a bad reputation finally start to open up to the world? What were the actual keys that unlocked this paradise?
To really get the transformation, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the challenges. For decades, a whole series of major hurdles kept the region's massive tourism potential completely locked down.
And the barriers were just formidable. First off, widespread insurgency was the biggest one. And I'm not talking about small pockets of trouble. Every single state in the region, except for Sikkim, went through long periods of conflict. On top of that, you had poor infrastructure, you had these restrictive permit systems for travelers, inconsistent government policies, and of course that really damaging negative public perception we just talked about.
And the impact was obvious. As researchers have pointed out, tourists just don't want to go to a place they think is in turmoil. It's common sense, right? Peace and security are the absolute bedrock of tourism, and for a very long time, that foundation just wasn't there.
And the data, well, it just shows how different things were on the ground. Check this out. Back in 2005, Sikkim was already welcoming over 347,000 domestic tourists. Now, fast forward almost a decade later, and states like Nagaland and Mizoram are seeing just a tiny fraction of that. This wasn't a small gap. It was like they were in two completely different tourism universes.
And this brings up a really crucial question that helps us see the path forward. What was Sikkim doing right? Why was this one state, which was mostly free from the insurgency that hit its neighbors, able to build a successful tourism model while everyone else was lagging so far behind? The answer, it turns out, is basically the blueprint for the change that was about to come.
Because starting around 2014, a massive shift began. A really concerted top-down effort was launched to systematically fix those long-standing problems, and it kicked off a decade of just unprecedented transformation across the entire region.
The strategy was, at its core, a two-pronged approach. And the logic was really simple. First, you have to bring peace and security. That's non-negotiable. Only then can you start building the modern connectivity, the roads, the airports, the railways that you need to link this remote region with the rest of the country and, the world.
And the results on the security front have been nothing short of staggering. Between 2014 and 2024, the region saw a nearly 70% drop in violent incidents compared to the decade before. Over 10,000 militants actually laid down their arms and joined the mainstream. That is a monumental shift towards stability.
And this wasn't just a number on a chart. It had a huge human impact. We're talking about an 89% reduction in civilian deaths. This return of peace was the single most important key to unlocking the region's potential. It allowed people to finally feel safe, and for tourism to even be a possibility.
So, with peace finally taking root, the focus shifted to that second prong, a connectivity revolution. And the numbers, well, they speak for themselves. The number of airports doubled. Inland waterways grew from just 1 to 20. Rail lines were pushed into states that had never even had them. And these huge, game-changing projects like the Bogabeel Bridge, they cut a 24-hour drive down to just 5.
So what does all this new infrastructure actually mean? It means easier access to the region's most iconic treasures, from the one-horned rhinos of Kaziranga National Park to the incredible living root bridges of Meghalaya. These wonders were always there, but now finally they are actually within reach for millions of people.
And this wasn't happening by accident. It was all part of a very deliberate strategy. Schemes like Swadesh Darshan, which was launched back in 2014, specifically targeted the Northeast. They invested heavily to develop these theme-based tourist circuits, making sure that all the new infrastructure led directly to new, well-managed tourist experiences.
Now, to really understand the specific ingredients for success, we have to look back at Sikkim. Remember how it was always the outlier? Well, by looking closer at its model, we can see the exact formula that the rest of the region is now starting to adopt.
One of the clearest differences was simply financial commitment. This chart shows that Sikkim consistently put a much bigger slice of its state budget into tourism, almost 2% on average. Compare that to states like Nagaland and Mizoram, which were allocating less than 0.5%. Sikkim actively prioritized tourism as a real economic engine.
So the Sikkim formula is crystal clear, and it really provides a blueprint that the whole region can follow. It starts with long-term peace. Then you back that up with a clear, forward-looking state tourism policy, which, by the way, Sikkim has had since 1998. Then you fund that policy with consistent, higher budgets, and this is critical, you have fewer barriers to entry, like the interline permit that's required in some of the other states.
So with this blueprint now being applied more broadly, and with peace and connectivity just transforming the entire region, the focus is really shifting to the future. And according to the experts, the growth that lies ahead is set to be absolutely explosive.
Get this. A recent report from the hospitality consultancy HVS Anarock predicts that the number of branded hotel rooms in the Northeast will nearly double by 2030. That's over 3,000 new rooms in the pipeline. This isn't just wishful thinking. This is a tangible sign that major investors are betting big on the region's future. But to really wrap your head around the sheer scale of the opportunity, think about this. In 2024, the Northeast still accounted for less than 1% of all domestic tourist visits in India. That tiny little slice isn't a weakness. It's probably the single biggest indicator of its massive, untapped potential for growth.
Of course, the journey isn't over. To truly capitalize on this momentum, experts suggest the region still needs to streamline its regulations. A harmonized single-window clearance system, for example, is recommended to cut through all the red tape and make it way easier for private investment to flow in.
When you look at a landscape like this, you can just feel the sense of possibility. After decades of being defined by its challenges, a new chapter is finally being written for Northeast India. One that's defined by peace, by connection, and by sharing its unparalleled natural and cultural heritage with the rest of the world.
The journey from paradise unexplored to a global tourism hotspot has been truly remarkable. The keys of peace and connectivity have finally unlocked the door, but the story is still very much unfolding. The big question now is, what will this next explosive chapter of growth hold for the people and the landscapes of this incredible region?